Uh, so basically, the super short version is this. So if you want randomize and palm to be similar, then you have to use this minus, say, 1 minus p as an argument to palm, and that just tells it to, do what you'd think. So now high values represent low p values. So I ran it a couple of ways. This one here is basically as close as you can get to randomize. So, we could just, for our own edification, find out what that does. This is the randomized code that you've already seen previously. Let me see. What I called these things. Oh, randomize on the design. Got it. ACI is sleepy today.
It's been a sleepy month for ACI. It might be sick.
I know, that's the way at least it doesn't have the coronavirus.
So I'll start out just with the randomize, which I think we'd seen before. Okay. So for the randomize, by default, it likes to just give you the one-sided result. So even if I do what should normally be a two-sided contrast here, you can see that that greater than 0 map. Let me just pull this up side by side. The greater than 0, I did this randomize minus I, the filtered func data, the mask. I just called it GT0. And then I have the sign flipping on with the -1. TFCE is the -T. That's the number of permutations, or actually sign flips in this case. And you'll see that by default, you don't get anything that's negative. I can't really tell that because this is a p-value map, so by definition, the p-values can't be negative. So if you wanted to kind of confirm that for yourself, randomize does output, I think I just closed it and I'll reopen it. Does output the t-stat map. but that's not thresholded. So if you just want to get a feel of what it's working from. You'll see that there are these negative values in the t-stat map, but if I remember right, and maybe I'm misremembering, you can see how those tend to go away with the p-value computation. Now, it could be that they're just really weak, but I think even in a very strong negative map, it does this one-sided behavior. So this image labeled one samp TFCE, corrected P, tstat1, that's threshold-free cluster enhancement. These are the corrected p-values for whole brain. And tstat1, I think, is the only one we have here because it's a sign flip. So it's just a one sample t-test based on sign flipping. And it has that property that we were talking about, that the low values are actually high values. So it's 1 minus p. The reason for that is just to make it so that the thresholding here works. So now we can set it to 0.995 and 1, and this would be, these are voxel, I should say clusters that are whole brain significant at a whole brain significance level of 0.005 or less. If we wanted to do 0.05 or less, you can see those clusters just get a little bigger. This is the reward prediction error map, which is very robust in these data, so that's part of why you get such a clear map. If you use permutation testing in general, sometimes you'll obliterate your map. And that's not anything to say about the procedure or your data. It's just, this is a particularly robust map for permutation. If we want to see what was below 0, that was whole brain significant, we might do like a blue color scale just to help us remember these are negative. And you can see that FSLIs automatically sets the max in the data. So not looking promising. Like if I go to 1 and then the minimum, let's say 0.95, you can see that we just don't have anything that's whole brain significant. That less than 0 map was produced by manually multiplying the data by -1 and then running it through Randomise again. And this is because of that property where Randomise only does a kind of one-sided test. Everybody good on that so far? So if we then wanted to compare that map to what Palm produces, the one that's labeled mimic Palm randomized mimic, that was just my little nomenclature, that's here. You can see we have 5,000 permutations, TFCE correction. This 1 minus P is the save out. Then we could plot this on top. And we could see if that produces anything of interest. And one thing that's weird about this one, I haven't even looked at these since I ran it, so we might encounter something unfortunate. To me, it looks like that contrast 1 is just coming up as null. Should have an uncorrected P map. Those are all 0 as well. Meanwhile, contrast 2 looks closer to what we have. So let me just drop those off for a second. So to me, this looks like, we need to do further investigation because it doesn't look that great. I'm guessing this C2 should stand for contrast to. And the way that these work is typically you're giving it the entire design matrix with the contrast in it. I did that down here as well for randomize, rather than doing the sign flipping alone. So this is based on permutation testing. This is based on permutation testing. This is technically based on pure sign flipping. So on the sign flipping approach, everything looks kind of hunky-dory. When we get here, this should be the uncorrected P map. So if we just wanted to get a sense of what are we even starting with, kind of looks like maybe it doesn't show what we would expect even vaguely. And for, well, I guess what troubles me is that this uncorrected map is entirely null. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We could compare it against the closest randomize, which is these. And now we can see that that looks really familiar. That's our pretty much the exact map we got from sign flipping. So the one labeled GT0, oops, GT0 with the corrected p-value. I'm just going to promote this so we can see it at the same time. You can see those are kind of the same map. In fact, I'll just flip between them and can't even really see anything. It's kind of rounding error at this point. So that's just the difference between the first one was produced with this call where I don't have a design matrix specified for randomize. I'm just sign flipping. The second one I produced by giving it the design matrix. So what does the design matrix even look like? You can always pull that up using, I always get the nomenclature confused. Using the GLM tool, you should be able to pull that up, maybe. Oh, it's gonna ask for the FSF, that's fine. So you'll see that the first row, which is gonna turn into the first T statistic, is the intercept. The second column, I should say, the first column is the intercept, the second column is age. So that should correspond to our T-stat1, T-stat2. So it's reassuring that the randomized perm TFCE core P T-stat1 is very, very similar to the GT0. Why are they different at all, even rounding error? Where did I put my... The reason that they're different is this randomized doesn't have a design. It's just saying, is the contrast greater or less than 0? And again, it's going to only keep the greater than 0 for the p-value calculations. This one, on the other hand, has the design matrix, which means that it's going to do the GLM-based approach, where now the T-stat1 is the intercept of the prediction error, not the completely unadjusted marginal effect of prediction error. In other words, I believe I've mean-centered age in my GLM design. That's why you'll see some of these are negative and some of them are positive. If you wanted to, you can read that into R to confirm it. So if you ever just look at your design.mat files, they're mostly readable in R. They just have 5 rows up front. So if I go into R, and I just want to kind of spot check a design from FSL, I can do read.table, design.mat, skip equals 5, just to tell it to skip those first 5 rows. There are 70 subjects in the data set, and you'll see an error if you do like skip 4 or skip 3, because those are the ones that have the weird header. So it's 5 rows that you skip. And then if we were just to look at the data frame that's in there, we got 2 variables. First is the intercept, second is age. We could do the the means on the columns. And you'll see that the mean of the first one is, not surprisingly, 1. That's the intercept. It should always be 1 by definition. Usually in software like R, SPSS, you get that for free. In FSL, you need to specify it yourself. The second column is age, and the reason I wanted to read it into R is just to confirm it's actually mean-centered. So the mean is basically 0 or infinitesimally close to 0. Therefore, what's the difference? So going back to the question of what's the difference between those two calls. Maybe. Come on, buddy. The difference in those two is actually that this one, the tstat1 from this full randomized call, is the prediction error at the average level of age in the sample, because age is mean-centered. So now the intercept represents the model's prediction on prediction error-related activity at the mean of age. Now, if you had mean-centered age, it would be the model's prediction of prediction error activity at an age of 0. So it's just the same as standard regression. So that's why there are tiny differences. The one here labeled randomized perm, where I handed it the design matrix, is now the adjusted effect, in the sense that it's the prediction error related activity adjusted for age. Whereas this one is actually blind to age. There's no correction at all. It's the true marginal relationship, true kind of unadjusted relationship. The other one I wanted to show you is, I think I maybe didn't have it in here. The ones labeled randomized perm are based on the permutation. You'll get that tstat2 now. That's going to be the effect of age, whole brain adjusted. So I'm going to turn off the tstat1 for a moment and the GT0 for a moment. So this is going to be our whole brain corrected age map. You can kind of see some bad news here that that highest value appears to be 0.9. So our most significant cluster whole brain is around p-value 0.1. So if we do 1.95, then you can see the map goes away, basically saying that there's no whole brain significant cluster for an age effect, linear age effect. And of course, you can wind it downward if you wanted to see something like if there's an effect of age that's even vaguely significant. The answer is not much, right? Even at 0.5, we have a little bit of stuff going on, but it doesn't survive whole brain correction. So again, if you run randomize with your design.mat file and your design.con file, then it's going to do the full GLM-based approach. Any questions on that? Or should we go back to Palm and its weirdness?
So when it's getting the map for the intercept and that full GLM-based approach, is it doing sign flipping for the intercept and then permutation for age?
It's doing permutation for everything, I believe.
So how can you do the permutation for the intercept?
I forget.
Maybe I'm just, yeah.
I think it's in the paper.
Okay.
It's probably, yeah, I honestly don't remember. It's possible that they're using some sort of random blocking, like splitting it into 2 random splits, like a split half, random split half.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd have to go back to the paper to.
Okay, I guess the reason I'm asking is like for my Palm, I did exchangeable errors like the EE flag. And I was wondering if that might be messing up my intercept map, or if we're confident that it does that fine.
Yeah, I know they have the EE and the ISE as options in Palm, which has to do with whether you do permutation, sign flipping, or both. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to dig into it.
Okay.
Michael, I had more of like a dumb regression-y question. So does this mean that there is no effective age in the data set and therefore we have a regressor in the model that we don't need?
It is consistent with the conclusion that there's no whole brain significant age effect. Whether that means you don't need the model regressor in the model is a different matter, I think. If it's truly a nuisance covariate, then it's actually better to keep it in the model. So, for example, in general, I think if you're not interested in, let's say, age and sex effects, but you still have some age and sex heterogeneity in the sample, then I think it's better to include those as predictors in the group GLM, so that your intercept now represents the brain map for the average age in the sample and the average sex in the sample.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's kind of weird to think about sex as having an average, but it just basically represents a proportionality view of it. It's like, given the proportions of men and women in our study, this is a map that looks, that sort of is most representative of the proportions that we had.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? So I don't really know what's going on with Palm. It's not a tool I've spent any time with, other than reading these papers. So if it's useful, we can try and sort it out. So the one that I did initially is this one SAM. You can see it produces way more stuff. So you still get the C1 and C2. Those are going to be your intercept and age. But now you're going to also get the TFCE corrected versus the voxel-wise corrected. So if we just wanted, for example, whole brain voxel-wise corrected p-values, it would be this one. That goes back to that when we talked about the permutation procedure. If you just are using the voxel-wise test as your kind of pivotal statistic, then it's easy enough to get a whole brain voxel-wise adjusted. If you move to the view that we're interested in clusters, then you start having to say, well, what's the chance that a cluster of this size would randomly appear in the data? And that, I think we walked through the algorithm when we talked about that. So we could just, for reference, see what the t-statistic for the whole brain corrected intercept is. Go ahead and go back to this for comparison. That looks pretty good, actually. So this is the voxel-wise t-statistic on that family-wise error map. So the white is the Palm-based output. The yellow, red-yellow is the sign flipping only approach. And I can threshold this at the same level just for comparison. So it looks like in this case, Palm produces a somewhat more conservative map than the sign flipping randomize alone. But again, this is the voxel level inference, as opposed to TFCE, which is deliberately trying to tilt the calculus toward clusters that are whole brain significant. So you can sort of, typically, even if you do a permutation procedure on the voxel statistics, you'll still get clusters because clusters are, t-statistics in adjacent clusters are highly correlated, partly because we smooth them. But you're going to see a more conservative view of this. So that's part of why cluster correction, like TFCE or the Monte Carlo universe, has become so popular. So then the equivalent here would be the TFCE map. So many of these outputs. Now I'm trying to even remember what the CFWEP versus the FWEP is. Do you guys remember that? Have you looked at the documentation? I'm tempted to say one is cluster, but does anybody know that?
This is the POM documentation.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. Oops, I just loaded the same thing by accident. Trying to understand what CFWEP is compared to just FWEP.
Oh, that's cluster family-wise error versus cluster family-wise error.
I find that confusing. Is it just me? Because TFCE, if it's in there, you would think that that's like,
yeah.
how can you have TFCE with FWE and with FWE?
Yeah, I looked at this first.
So this would be the one I would tend to look at. I wonder if I'm just confusing myself. Yeah, that looks really close to sign flipping, which is what you would hope.
Looks like CFWEP is if you have the option minus core con used.
Oh, okay.
Is, I guess, within modality p-value or something like that.
Yeah, I think the minus core con, which I did turn on just for kind of my own edification, corrects for correlations among the contrasts, which in this case should be 0, but I was just kind of curious what would happen. So if you were to have, two regressors, let's say, I don't know, age and pubertal status, those correlate. Therefore, their p-values will correlate. And if you wanted to get p-values that kind of respect that whole brain correlation and still adjust for it, then that's what it's for. So I guess in this case, we would hope that the one that doesn't have the CFWEP is basically within round number. Let's see.
So you have both because you ran it both ways.
I think I got both because I turned on that core con.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see at least at that voxel they're within rounding error of each other. Yeah, so that's reassuring. But I guess for this purpose, the CFWEP we should ignore. And if we just compare it against the pure sign flip map, you can see a high level of convergence. If we compare it against the randomized map with the full GLM, we should hope for a very high level of convergence as well. And you can see down to the 4th decimal place so far, they're pretty much the same. So it's good news. If we go out here, looks like they diverge a little bit more. Yeah, even if we go downward, they're super similar. So I guess, that seems like a win that particular map compares favorably. And again, if we compare it to the voxel-wise, I'll just put the voxel-wise in green for a second. It's pretty hard to see. Let me try a different color palette. How about pink? I guess I can see that. So now you're comparing on the bottom the standard permutation-based approach. Here, this is the voxel-wise correction where we're not applying any kind of clustering procedure. And you can see you're getting the same voxels, but a smaller subset of them. There's no procedure here that's kind of preferencing voxels that are contiguous, spatially contiguous. And then finally, if I overlay on top the TFCE from Palm, you can see that it kind of goes back to the Randomise, which also had TFCE. So these two maps are reassuringly the same. This one, where you just have voxel-wise correction, is getting the same stuff, but because you're correcting for voxels, not clusters, then your penalty is much steeper on like an individual p-value. So then let's go back to the other one that was messed up, because so far I feel reassured, but so many outputs. I don't know. What does cluster E do? You know, I didn't ask for that one either. Is that the exchangeable
Cluster.
errors? I'm guessing that's what that is.
Looks like it's cluster extent. Does that sound right?
Huh. But it still has a p-value map. I wonder if that's not based on TFCE, but actually based on cluster extent, which is closest to the alpha cluster sim from AFNI.
Yeah, it looks like they have cluster E for extend, they have cluster mass, or TFC.
Are you looking
Okay.
at the spatial statistics for Palmer under or randomize on the FSL page?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm on the Palm user guide on the FSL wiki.
Yeah, but is it under the Palm or randomize subheading? Yeah.
Lost it.
That's
Looks like it's just under like output. It's just like describing the output.
Yeah, so I think that's what that is. Yeah, I didn't know that they gave you that. That's pretty cool. So the cluster E is going to be the closest procedure to the kind of alpha sim approach, where we are actually using the size of the cluster as the permutation inference. So we're trying to say, what's the probability that a cluster of size 30 would exist by chance? So that's what this is closest to conceptually. TFCE we'd have to talk about separately, but it's basically a transformation on a spatial map that tries to preference clusters. So it actually transforms the map before it runs any permutation on it. But you can see the cluster E map is very, very similar. It's a little more narrow, I would say.
Michael, just to clarify, when you say it's the cluster E is more similar to the alpha sim, are you referring to like the MCMC and 3D class sim?
Yes.
Okay.
why is it
Okay,
called
so we get,
Alpha Sim?
what's that?
Why is it called Alpha Sim?
Sounds cooler.
The best
Alpha Sim was the old program that AFNI made, and then they changed it to Clust Sim. I'm not sure why this. Yeah, I think when I learned about it, it was still called Alpha Sim. So that's that. I guess so far it looks good. So we've got 3 groups of outputs: cluster E, which is permutation based on the cluster extent, how big it is; TFCE, where you transform the map up front to preference clusters and then run permutation; and voxel, where you're running it voxel by voxel. So the atomic unit is the voxels, but there's no preferencing of clusters. I guess my Palm randomized mimic is the one that got all screwed up. I'm kind of curious about that one. So this would be our closest. TFCE, FWP, blah, blah, blah. And it's just a flat 0. It's just a completely null map.
Thought you knew that the brain does nothing.
I'm just trying to look at, this is the call that I made. I actually pulled this off of the FSL listserv. Somebody was asking for like, what's the closest Palm call to randomize? And this was the answer. You know, I guess a couple of things stand out. One is it's not two-tailed, but I would think that that would lead us to get the positive side of it. And the second is that there's no specification of voxel-wise threshold, which is what that -c does. Yeah, that's just completely blank. What about the uncorrected p-values? Yeah, so something is squirrely because even the uncorrected p-values are 0. So we must have given Palm something that it hated, and it didn't. It ran it anyway.
That's the way it is for me when I run mine.
But it was blank.
Yeah. For the contrast one, anyway.
If it gave us any kind of grumpiness. Randomized memory. No, it just sort of says the same thing. I don't know what's done here. Well, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's a good use of anyone's time for us to try and troubleshoot that now. Other than I can paste my little script into the channel and we could try and diagnose why it is that this generates nothing, whereas the call that made sense to me generates a map that completely matches the other randomized outputs.
Would you mind pulling up your call one more time? Just
Yeah, it's kind of tiny out on me.
I'm just like walking through all the potential things that you could add on the like user guide. Nothing's jumping out.
Yeah, so the top one is the one that works. And the second one is the one that doesn't. We're getting to put some line breaks in here. Oops.
Is the main difference the inclusion of the 3.1?
And the use of the two-tail, which might matter, as well as the ISEEE, which tells it that sign flipping and permutation are used.
Why?
So if you don't tell it anything on sign flipping and permutation, it figures it out on its own.
It says exchangeable errors are assumed by default such that permutations are performed. If the option ISE is supplied, the errors are, oops, I just lost it, are instead assumed to be independent and symmetric, and only sign flips are performed. If both EE and ISE are performed, the errors are treated as exchangeable, independent, and symmetric, and both sign flipping and permutation are performed.
So maybe the lack of the ISE in the second statement then.
Yeah, I'd be interested if, you know, this kind of goes to your earlier question, Daniel. If sign flipping is essential to get the intercept map and we run an analysis that doesn't do it and we get nothing, is that because there's no variance in the first regressor?
Yeah.
Like, I guess maybe a spot check on that possibility would be to look at the C2 maps, because those are continuous and should be permutable. So like if I go to C2 uncorrected, oh yeah, there you go. That's some variation. Yeah.
So what happens? So if it's just EE, it just permutes, it doesn't sign flip. Is that correct?
If it's just EE, it just permutes. That's correct.
Is that an acceptable thing to do with a permutation test? Sorry, not a permutation test, with an intercept test.
I mean, I guess that's the question that we're asking.
Yeah, I feel like I need to go back to the paper and get the strict definition of what the ISE is.
I mean, given that permutation is based on reordering the regressor, I mean, in just a kind of standard, simple, build-it-yourself permutation, let's say that you have two things and you're trying to correlate them with each other and you get a correlation of 0.5 and you say, well, what's the p-value if I were to permute it? Well, then the way you would do it is to shuffle. Let's say you're correlating age and pubertal status and you wanted a permutation-based p-value. Then what you would do is shuffle one of the vectors. Let's say you leave age alone, but you permute pubertal status 1,000 times. And every time you permute it, you're just shuffling the values of that vector and running the correlation again. Then you would think at the limit that there should be a zero correlation because you're scrambling the relationship between age and pubertal status across that set of permutations. So I guess what I'm getting at is permutation is based on the idea that the scrambling, the reordering of the values randomly helps you to generate a valid null distribution. And if I just scramble a vector of ones, then I haven't done anything. There's no new information or no, there's no change in the test. So I would venture that that's what's happening, is that if you have an intercept term in there, then that's not really permutable, it's only sign flippable. Which is why we're getting continuous p-values for the second contrast, which is age, but we're not getting anything for the first. It's interesting it doesn't like yell at you or, tell you that there's no standard deviation in your first regressor and, you should do something about it. But I don't remember seeing anything that drew my attention to it.
Randomise just knows to do that.
It must, yeah. I didn't tell it to do anything about it.
Yeah, given that they're made by the same people, you'd think Palm would at least tell you like you're using a, just permutation when sign flipping is recommended or something.
Yeah, you would think if any regressor is constant or has standard deviation less than 0.001, then you would alert the user. Well, do you guys want to see anything else? Do you kind of understand what I'm doing by overlaying these on each other?
Is there a way to, like, I don't know, like I can sort of do it by eye with AFNI versus, because I compared it to 3D custom, but like that inherently feels like you can't really easily compare across those.
Yeah, the best way to do that, a formal comparison, is to create a new image. So let's say we wanted to formally compare the p-values for, let's say the Palm TFCE versus the Palm voxel-wise. Then what we would want to do is say FSL maths, and I'm going to grab the first one. So I said TFCE on our intercept map. Minus sub is to subtract. And then I would say the same image, but now that vox is the uncorrected, or sorry, not uncorrected, but the, oh wait, hold on. I actually think I did get the uncorrected. That's not gonna help us. One more time. The ones that say, there's too many outputs, they have this FWEP on them. That's the ones we want. So the comparable one here can be that. Except I forgot to put the sub in here. So I'm going to say take the 1 minus p map for the TFCE based permutation, subtract from it the again whole brain corrected, but now the voxel as the inference. Then I might call this TFCE minus vox and just hit return. What that does is now we have a map that for every voxel, this the value is this minus this. And then we would visualize that explicitly. Now it's going to be on new units or on a new scale. Let's turn all these off for a second. We can now kind of click around for a moment. You can see that I have a lot of zeros hanging out here. There's also going to be some negatives. So that's where we're going to need to use the 2-color scale approach. Why is it doing this to me? There it is. And once you do that, then the difference between the 2-color scales and the 1 is now this is the min max on the absolute value. So if we wanted to say, just show me any p-value that made a change of, let's say, 0.1 or greater, then the maximum absolute p-value change would be 1, because that would mean in the FWE map it was, or sorry, the TFCE map it was a 1, and in the voxel-wise it was a 0. So we know that just rationally has to be the maximum, but the minimum, that's our choice. So now I'm saying an absolute change in p-value of 0.1 or greater, I want to see it. And if we do that, then you can actually see that there's really no blue. I don't know how low we'd have to go here. Thought we had a little bit of blue in here. Where did my blue go? There it is. Oh, it's really tiny. Yeah, so the blue changes are just basically 0. That's why they go away so easily. So again, if I go back to 0.1 to 1, then what am I seeing? Well, it might help you just for your own edification to actually put the constituent maps that comprise the subtraction, which I think is that one. Oh no, the randomized mimic is the one that's messed up. Hold on. Let's clear out a bunch of these. So it was this one, TFCE, family-wise ARP. And then it's cousin this. Nope. Well, we know that the C FWEPs are equivalent since there's no correlation in the contrast. So I'm happy just putting those up. So now let's go somewhere and see what's changing. So if I go back to my TFCE map, you can see that here's a voxel, for example, that in the voxel-wise inference is pushed towards 0, meaning it wasn't significant whole brain, but in the TFCE enhanced map, it is significant. And then you subtract that, which is just that minus 0 in this case, and that's what you're getting voxel-wise. So 0.1 is maybe a little liberal. We're seeing a whole lot going on, right? You can see too much. But the fact that you're seeing, just turn off these guys again. Seeing so much, do I still have something? How did that blue survive back there? I guess that's the one place in the entire brain is blue. So the fact that you're seeing so much of this means that these are all the voxels where the TFCE correction or TFCE enhancement led to a stronger p-value, a better p-value that's lower than the voxel-wise procedure. So if you were to see, for example, a mix of red and blue, you would look at it and go, wow, sometimes the voxel-wise correction is whole brain significant and the TFCE is not, and sometimes it goes the other way. The TFCE is better than voxel-wise. But the fact that this is basically entirely red-yellow means that TFCE whole brain never really hurt the inference compared to the alternative of a voxel-wise inference. The TFCE is helping in this case. If you want to see how much, you might go for a higher threshold. maybe like 0.7, 0.8. And these are voxels that would be completely absent and very weak in the voxel-wise inference, but are present in TFCE. Now, to really make this shine, I think you kind of have to answer for yourself what these holes are. And to do that, let's bring back the voxel-wise map, which I think is that one. Maybe one sandbox. Yeah, that's it. Right, there we go. I'm just gonna change those over to something a little more obvious. So these blue clusters now are the ones that survived whole brain voxel-wise permutation at 0.95. That is alpha of 0.05 or less. And you can see that they're hiding inside these little cutouts, right? So you can see that what TFCE bought you was not this stuff where there's no difference, that is both procedures remain whole brain significant, but instead the perimeter where the TFCE is really buying you, for example, this contiguity along the intraparietal sulcus that you wouldn't otherwise have. So that's how I would formally compare methods, is to subtract the images from each other, display that, look at the difference, and then put the constituents on the map as well so you can actually see what's what. Questions about that? Is that helpful, Allison?
Is there, I guess, like a command in AFNI to be able to, I guess, spit out a nifty that's clusterized at a certain threshold? I feel like
yes, it's 3D clust. Yeah, and I forget the exact argument that outputs the map, but it'll be obvious if you look at the help. You just have to specify a voxel-wise threshold and a cluster size, and it should do that. If it doesn't, I'll have to look back at it, but let me know if you get stuck, because I can't remember if it'll set a threshold for you or whether you have to do it after the fact. Either way, it's not difficult. Do we want to talk at all about the ETAC faking thing, or is that too far afield?
I'd be curious, but I wouldn't mind if we skipped it.
I mean, I can give you a start. The short answer is I haven't done it either, and it would take some time. But 3D t-test++ has a lot of output apparently.
Yeah, it will fill it won't fit on your terminal screen.
Okay. Oh yeah. So if we scroll down here. There it is. Then it has this kind of detail. So you can see that you can tell it to turn on ETAC and do that multiple threshold type approach. But the difficulty is to give it the inputs that it will tolerate and actually run on. And I don't know, Daniel, do you want to summarize how far you got on it?
Yeah, I guess not that far. I get the statement laid out the way it says to have it. But then I guess the two things I got caught up on is they want a mask.
Mm-hmm.
I guess would that be a group level mask? And I wasn't sure how to create one. And then it wants AFNI files, the bricks and heads, and we don't have those. So
So a mask, yeah, a group mask makes sense. That would be the most conservative approach. You can either steal the one from FSL, which is called mask, and it should be in the .gfeat folder, or you could manually generate it by creating a union of all the level 1 masks. You can do that using 3D tcat, 3D, which is to concatenate images along the 4th dimension. So if you take all of the subject mask files from the subject analysis, or not even analysis, subject preprocessing, they're called subject_mask.nia.gz, and you use 3D tcat and put them together, then you'll have a 4D image of masks, and then you can actually kind of pick and choose what you want to do with it. You can say, I want the intersection, in which case it's basically the multiplication of that image along the 4th dimension. Like it has to be 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 at every single voxel for it to stay a 1. If any 0 enters into that chain of multiplications, it becomes 0. Or you could take a union approach and say if anybody had the voxel, then it gets to live. And then there's stuff in between. We have scripts, for example, where we say, well, at least 95% of the group has to have this voxel. So that's something I can point you toward if you're interested.
Okay.
The input problem is harder. What's the argument for even inputting into 3D t-test? Minus set A, right?
I can pull mine up.
So that's going to be the data set. So it says, you want it to be some first level data set. And it says you can specify multiple bricks. Well, it's not so helpful if you don't even have bricks in the first place. And it does mention that the beta data set is the name of the data set of the beta coefficient. So the way you would fake this is to, first of all, AFNI will read nifty images without complaint. So you can just hand it any nifty and it will figure it out. I don't think there are any exceptions to that. It used to be a little more finicky about it, but I think it pretty much works these days. And then basically just point it toward what brick you want to analyze. So in our case, if we had something like zstat1.nii.gz, because FSL only outputs one sub-brick in AFNI speak, that is, there's never a 4th dimension. It's always zstat1, zstat2, zstat3, as opposed to the AFNI convention is I take all my statistics and I put them in one file. And then in the 4th dimension of that file, it's like statistic 1, statistic 2, statistic 3. So because FSL only ever outputs one statistic to one file, then you're always talking about sub-brick 0 in AFNI speak. The sub-bricks in AFNI are always 0-based. So the first one is 0, the second one is 1, and so on. So you should be able to still hand it this set A, and it would be something like, for every subject you want to enter in here, it would be cope. Let's say you want to run this on the first contrast, first beta. It would be cope 1 bracket 0, and that's for the subject 1. Then the second subject, cope 1 bracket 0, cope 1 bracket 0, and so on. So you're just gonna, if you have 70 subjects, you would have this long string of 70 subfolders, like subject 1 / cope 1 bracket 0, subject 2 / cope 1 bracket 0, and so on. So you would force AFNI to chew on these betas that were produced by FSL is the way you would fake it that way.
Okay.
I guess I'm confused about the difference between the set A versus set B in this case. Like what nifty things are you pulling in for set A versus set B?
I think set B is intended to mimic a 2-sample t-test, if I remember right. So that it would be like, group A is set A and group B is set B. The reason why you do that in this really, like, why not just have some sort of general linear model approach? I think they allow, if I remember right, for different kinds of heterogeneity or variance differences between the groups. That's certainly how 3D MIMO works. like in 3D Mima, you can have 2 groups, but allow for different heterogeneity, different variance estimates in the 2 groups. But yeah, if you just wanted, for example, to fake the intercept, then you'd be talking about the copes, like for the entire data set for every subject. If you had something like a BPD control contrast, you might end up faking set A as controls, set B as BPDs.
Do you know off the top of your head where the copes are for individual subjects?
For the clock data?
Yeah. Or any
yeah. So let's see. To keep yourself sane, I would work from what's called the level 2 models, which is the ones where we aggregate runs within subject. So all the data live in this folder you see above. If I were just to go into one subject, it's always going to be 5mm aroma. And then you can kind of take your pick. If you wanted to stick with the simple prediction error model, it's clock, feedback, PE, max. Oops. This one. And then it's feet, level 2, run trend.g feet. So in here, I can just pull up the design to give you a sense of it. The level 2 copes, the first one is the intercept, and that if you wanted to work from that, that's what you would do. If you're interested in the emotion contrast or even the confound of run order, that's over here. But
Okay.
basically, you would steal for every subject. Yeah, I hate FSL's naming. So, yeah. Let me confirm this for myself real quick. Oh my God. This is why I wrote a script to do this. So there, in every file, there's also this that will actually have labeled things so that you can move on with your life. You could actually just keep your life even easier and steal from the brick.gz that exists. If you wanted to truly build this from parts from FSL, you need to kind of follow this up. But because the pipeline I've written already converts everything to AFNI for visualization, you would be looking for PE overall coef. That's going to be the beta for prediction error at the level 2. So it's actually sub-brick 38 for everybody.
So if you were to do, like go into the cope folder, would you go into like cope1.feet? Sorry, I'm so confused now.
I know, I hate it. So design.con has the second level contrast. That kind of sort of helps. And you can see it says there are 8 contrasts. So let's just take a look at that. If you want to be able to build this from parts. Considering it. Yeah, for these analyses, it actually has to read the lower level data. It's running on
FSL is
the
so slow. So sad.
I think it's because it's actually reading the data right now, and ACI is running slow.
It's the time of day where it gets back up to 100%.
Yeah. Well, I guess while that's loading, does that make sense in terms of how you would fake it, Daniel?
Yeah, so it sounds like I could fake it with the copes, and then I could also even just give it subbrick 38 of those files and next to the copes.
Yeah, and it it finally loaded. I'll show you that in a second.
Okay.
That's right, and it's the sort of thing that's eminently scriptable, and your life will be way better if you write something like fake etac, and you say fake etac takes a .feat folder or .gfeat folder, and you tell it which contrast you want, and it generates that, generates, for example, the AFNI call or something that is more usable to you. You can look at the feat level 1 to AFNI or feat level 2 to AFNI R scripts as an example of that approach. But yeah, to your question, Allison, basically at the first level, there are 3 copes. Remember, the first level is run level. I've named the folders in the order of the copes just to keep myself sane. So it's clock, feedback, and PE max is the prediction error of the maximum height of the prediction error. So it's just where the prediction error peaks, since there's a basis function. So conceptually, it's clock, feedback, and prediction error. So if you're interested in looking at prediction errors, well, then you're talking about cope 3 at the lower level. But you have 8 inputs. Those are the 8 runs. And at the second level, then those are your 8 inputs. The intercept equally weights all of them. The 1, 0 is the dummy coding for where the happy and fear conditions occurred in the analysis. And then run trend is a covariate of no interest to pull out any run-by-run changes in activation. So bottom line is that at level 2, you want cope 1, it's the intercept. But, oh, sorry. I said it wrong. That's actually EV1. Oh my God, this is why I hate it so much. You have to go to the contrast tab and go to the one that you want to hold on to.
Yeah.
So at level 2, these are individual emotions. This is the overall contrast. This is the pairwise differences in emotion. That's the run confound. So you actually want the overall contrast, which is the intercept, basically. So that's going to be cope 4 at the second level.
And would it be like, I'm assuming we're giving it the beta coefficient, not the z-stats.
Correct. Yeah, 3D t-test ++ has to work on betas.
Okay.
Yeah, and in terms of like where all that stuff lives in here, again, this just makes me crazy, but we agreed that we're going to work on cope 3 from the first level. So cope 3 is the prediction error. It has its own .feat directory. If we go into the stats folder, there's now going to be 8 copes. Now you might be tempted to think those are runs, but no, they're not. They're these. So now we're talking about cope 4. So if I do,
Okay.
that's the full path. The gfeat folder, cope 3 for prediction error, stats, cope 4 for the overall contrast at the second level. And that's what you would actually feed systematically to FSL, or sorry, 3D t-test ++. If you want a little bit of help, I can point you guys, please don't mess with the files in here because I'm currently working on the paper revision that uses them. But there's an R data object that has all of this in it, just because it makes life better. So let me just remind myself exactly how this is structured, but it should be all the inputs for level 2 analysis. Rather than having you have to go track it down. Yeah, that's it. So that's the actual inputs. Yeah, so then I guess the level 3, I forget if I saved the level 3s. I can report back if you don't want to have to dig this up, but I should have an R data object that aggregates all of that. I guess as a different question, what do you guys want to talk about for fMRI next? Where should we go?
What are the options? Are there like things that you kind of have in mind, or?
I mean, I guess it's sort of like a question of whether you want to come away feeling like you can do stuff or whether you want to know stuff. I feel like if you want to do stuff, then you should. We should probably go back to being able to run first level analyses, and you should, for yourself, confirm that you can do that and you understand the outputs.
I would like to go back to first level analyses personally.
Okay.
I'd like to go in that direction as well, I think.
I guess, I think it does require whoever wants to participate on that call feeling like they're ready to go on that piece. And, I can communicate offline as needed. But yeah, I think we need to have like a kind of social accountability. Like if we're going to have the meeting, then everybody has got their outputs ready to go. Yeah, the alternative of knowing stuff as opposed to being able to do stuff would be to, talk about for example, another extension of TFCE called PTFCE. We could talk about those two and why one is better than the other in general. But that's more at the conceptual level.
Seems like it makes sense to make sure we can do the basic stuff before we learn advanced stuff.
So should we lay out like I could put a slight note up or just send out a Slack message outlining like these are the things on the checklist?
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, for me too.
And maybe even include like a small group analysis.
How do you mean?
As in like an example of
second
one or
level, or-
instructions to run our own?
Well, I guess what I mean is like for all the randomized stuff we've been doing, I handed you a group analysis.
Mhm.
And then previous to that, I had given you guys inputs for running a first level model. So you kind of have everything you would need to do the whole pipeline. And so I was proposing that it might be more than one meeting, but that the checklist takes you from running one subject to now running all subjects first level analysis, like in a loop. Once you can run one, you can pretty much run them all if you can just loop over the inputs. And then as a third step, doing a group analysis with, for example, family-wise error correction.
Yeah, sounds good.
That's good.
Okay, should we target 2 weeks again?
That seems reasonable
Or
to me. I
further?
guess how far, like how many steps are we thinking for getting through in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I feel like I'd want to see your like checklist before making a decision about when to meet next.
I can either mentally say the checklist now or put it up there and we can talk about it offline to decide.
What if when you put up the checklist, you put a poll for 2 or 3 weeks?
Okay,
That sounds reasonable to me.
we can do that.
Also, Michael, I was thinking about putting the meeting, like the recordings. I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to have access to these when we leave Penn State, but I thought we should keep them in Slate so that there's like a library of these videos. I know it's like not a complete fMRI meetings, but I know we had like talked about recording these a while back. So when we move to like meeting in person, I think it'd be good to record those and maybe have a library if that sounds good with everyone, if that's okay with you, Michael.
It's okay with me. I think the only challenge is just for somebody to bring a video camera or do a screencast or something.
Well, I will probably always be having to zoom into your meetings because I won't be able to go to Carolina with you. So maybe I can be in
Sure.
charge of making sure we're recording.
That is one advantage of Zoom is it's easy just to hit record. So.
And I think that you can.
Videos have been super helpful, I think. So if we can keep doing that, that would be great because I go back to them a
agree.
lot.
Yeah, I've rewatched multiple times.
Especially for like file paths, I'm like, there's no way
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
35 directories.
I realized like that was like one of the major obstacles to me completing a lot of the practical homework. I mean, now there are some other obstacles, but that was definitely like the first one was, yeah, it was like hard to remember what you were doing.
Yeah, I agree.
Got
Having
totally
that
lost, so.
ability to just keep going back and going back is really useful.
Okay.
I'll say that I think if you're worried about losing, if people are worried about losing the files, I think you can download them and save them that way too, instead of just the link, which again might die when we leave Penn State.
That's true. Yeah, I've done that before.
Yeah.
My thought was maybe to download them and like put them on YouTube as like a private channel or something like that, and then like have a link to that in Slate.
If it's
That's
public,
okay.
then I'll get popular.
I can make it public too. I just wasn't sure.
Give me an influencer.
Okay.
The plucky cast of backup characters.
I don't know how YouTube works. So if you can make it private, that's fine.
When is the move happening?
Well, if COVID didn't exist, it'd be at the end of June.
Okay.
Given that it exists, I don't know. I'm going to guess end of July.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I messed with your masks for the Medusa analysis.
Oh, that's okay. I got very weird results, and I'm like, this makes no sense. Yeah, so the hippocampus had become the medial prefrontal cortex.
Oh yeah, that's pretty fun.
All right. Well, I'll send out a message in a little bit.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Daniel, Alice.